Howdy doody, my name is Susie, and today I thought I would share with you how I make these irises, paper irises. And I'm making these irises out of 3 different types of paper, but the same pattern. So we're going to be making the irises out of the 10 to 12 cup basket coffee filters. We're also going to be making them out of the number 4 cone filters. And we're also going to be making them out of crepe paper, stretchy. So the construction of the flowers are going to be the same for all 3 papers. The only difference is in the way that we paint each one of the different types of papers. And we're going to have to make some adjustments to cutting out the pattern with the crepe paper because we need to cut it on the bias in order for it to stretch and create a ruffled edge. So let me just show you what we're going to make. So this is the cone coffee filter iris, if you can see that. And so that's the cone filter that I'm using. And what I've done is I've just drawn the pattern on the coffee filter, and I'll just add it to the link so that you can cut it directly from the coffee filter. And it's just a suggestion on how to place the petals to cut. So that's our cone coffee filter. Then I made this one. And this is the basket coffee filter. And you can see it's much thinner. The structure is a little tiny bit different. And the color is also different. And then there is the crepe paper. And you can see with the crepe paper how you can get really fantastic ruffles. And that looks very realistic as well. So in terms of the pattern, and it doesn't matter which one I'm going to make, I'm just going to be making a sample flower using the cone coffee filter. But like I said, the process is exactly the same, but the painting of each type of paper is going to be different. So I've got my patterns and I cut them out. And you're going to need 3 large petals like this. 3 large petals. And you're going to need 3 smaller petals, which is this. So 3 large petals, 3 small petals. And the large petals I'm talking about are the large outer petals. So there's 3. And then there's 3 smaller inner petals. And in addition to our large petals, we're going to need 3 of these, which is those. And that is that little inside, we're going to paint it yellow to create this relief as part of the flower. And these are stylized irises. They're not exactly as they are in nature, but I've just made them so that they look like an iris. 3 of these little guys, and these are the inner petals. You can see they're there. We're going to need 3 of these, and these are the inner petals. So they're just petals, little petals that are emerging from between the large petal and the inner petal. So you can see how there's 1, 2, 3, and when you turn it on the side, you can see they just lift up. So 3 of each, and that's what we're going to create. And basically, we're going to be needing, in terms of material, your paper of choice. We're going to be needing some 18 gauge wire that we're going to wrap with our green floral tape. Now, I just happened to buy this wire that's already wrapped. It was from the dollar store. So I'm going to use that. And then you need a very fine gauge wire. And I got this from the dollar store. And again, it doesn't have a gauge on it, but you can see how nice and flexible that is. You want something soft because this wire is going to be placed on the middle part of every petal so that we can maneuver the petal and conform it the way that we like. We're also going to need a glue gun, a little bit of paper towel. Oh, and then we're going to need our paint. So I've cut 3 of each in order to create 1 flower. Now, in addition to the 1 flower, we're going to want to make some leaves. And the leaves are quite simple. You can make these or not. But the leaves are going to be like this. If you're using the cone filter, and the leaves you'll cut out like this if you're using the basket filter. And then I'm going to show you separately how to cut the crepe paper because it's directional. So I'm going to show you the best way to cut the crepe paper separately. So all we're making are these leaves like this that we're just going to fold in half. We're going to fold them in half and we're just going to glue them directly to the stem. And all I did was just alternate them. Now on the top one, I used the smaller leaf, this one, and I folded it. And then I just folded a little piece of paper towel to create this bud right here. So that's an option if you want to add that or not. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is, now that we've got all our pieces cut out, this is the time to paint them. But before we go to the paint station, I'm going to show you how to cut the crepe paper. So for these 3 patterns, what you're going to do is you're going to cut on the fold. So you're going to fold each one of the patterns. And you're going to cut out some rectangles. Take my pattern, place it on the fold, and then I know that I can just cut this out. I want you to fold it in half, fold your stencil, and then cut out your stencil. And if you fold it in half and cut out your 3 stencils this way, then they'll always be perfectly aligned to stretch sideways because they're always going to be lined up with the direction of the crepe paper. But for the large petal, you have to cut it differently. So for the large petal, I want you to cut out a square. And the way that I measured the square was I put my petal on the diagonal. And the reason I'm putting it on the diagonal is because I want to be able to cut all along these little lines, because this way I'm going to be able to have the ability to stretch all the way around here and ruffle it. So first you cut out your square like this. So you've got your square, and then I want you to cut it on the diagonal from side to side. So take your piece of square and cut it on the diagonal from side to side. So you've got 2 pieces like this. And what you're going to do is you're going to take one piece, flip it over, and then you're going to overlay those two pieces and glue them together. And the reason that you're doing that is because once you glue them together with your wire in the center, and I'll show you how to do that. You just overlap the two pieces of paper in the center. Now you've created a V. So you see this square, if I was to turn it on its side, the lines are all going the same way. So pretend this is your crepe paper. This is our square and all the lines are going the same direction. And I've marked it A, B, C, D. Now I'm going to flip that piece of paper over. And when I put them together, you see it creates the V. And I've got A, D, B, C. So you see how the letters have changed. And that's exactly what you want to create, like this. Then you're going to overlap the center with a bit of glue, and you're going to add your wire to it, let it dry, and then you're going to come back and place that pattern right over, and now cut out your leaf. And what happens is, I'll show you, and this doesn't have to be 100% precise, because you're going to be able to stretch it. So now I've cut out, and you can see the lines are going in a V. And because I've glued it together this way and cut it out, see how all the lines are cut? I can do this, and I can do that. And you can see how I can stretch the paper to create a ruffle. And that's why it's important you glue it exactly like this. Now, if you're using the crepe paper for the center piece that we're going to cut and shag, then you want to use a piece of yellow or whatever color that you like, but I'm using yellow. And then I'm going to take like this, and then I'm just going to cut it out. And just cut it out so you've got your little pieces like this. Now, in order to make this petal, and for all the petals, we're going to be using this very thin gauged wire. And I'm just going to cut it in half. It's about 18 inches long, so I'm getting about 9 inches each. And I've got my piece of paper, and I'm going to cut it on the diagonal. And an easy way to cut it on the diagonal is so you can just take a ruler and a pencil and just scribe that line. Cut it in half. So here's my square. I've cut it in half. And now I'm going to flip this one over. And you see that when I flip it over, I'm creating a V. So I lay this down, and I take my glue, and I'm actually using Aleene's tacky glue, and it really makes a difference. It gives you so much more control over making your flowers, and they end up looking a lot better. So it's like Elmer's glue, but tacky. And the reason I like it is because it really tacks up just within a couple of minutes, and it doesn't have enough time to make your paper wet. So then I've just laid a thin line of glue, add your wire, and then I'm going to take the other piece and I'm just going to overlap it. And it's already starting to tack up, which is why I love using this. So it tacks up fairly quickly, but you have enough time to maneuver it. So now I've just overlapped it, and I've added my wire inside there. And it's a little bit difficult to do up the air, but you want to make that overlap as little as possible. These. So we're making 3 of each, regardless of the paper. So now that we've got our petals cut out, and this is for the cone coffee filter as well as the basket coffee filter, we're going to go over to the paint station, or we're going to go over to my counter where I've got my paints, and I'm going to show you how to paint them. But essentially what you want to do, and you can paint them however you like. In my case, what I've done is for the cone coffee filter, I used food coloring, and this is the color that you get, which I love. It's very, very bright, and there's a translucency to it. So all I did was I took some concentrated food coloring and I added it to the edges, and then of course in the center I added more of that food coloring, and I just made it darker on the top petals. For my basket coffee filter, I used acrylic paints, and I didn't use the food coloring because the paper is too thin to actually hold this kind of structure. So you really need the acrylic paints, because the acrylic paints makes this paper a little bit thicker so that you can maneuver it. But it does limit the color that you can create, only because the acrylic paints are more opaque than the food color. All the leaves I used acrylic, regardless of the paper that you're using, because you want a little bit more structure on the leaves, and the acrylic paint thickened them up. So you can see, using acrylic paint on both sides really thickens them up. For the crepe paper, I used oil pastels with alcohol. And what I did was I just wet the crepe paper around the edge, and then I added some of the pastel, and then I went back in with a little bit of just plain alcohol, and I wet it again, and it created this kind of muted effect. I know it looks very, very vivid on camera, but in real life, it's faded. And then I changed the color for the inner petals. So you can see this is a maroon crepe paper with purple on the outside, and it was the same technique. I wetted it with a bit of alcohol, I added the pastel, and then I wet it again, and I was able to spread it out more evenly. And this is just an oven liner. And it does make it easier if you're changing colors to just add a piece of cellophane and tape it off so that you can keep using the same tray, but I won't bother right now. So if you're making the crepe paper irises, you're going to need to add your wire to the large petals and the small petals before you paint. But if you're using the coffee filters to make the petals, then we're gonna have to paint it before we add the wire. So I've got here a small petal for the crepe paper, and I'm going to take again my wire, which is about 9 inches. It's half of the other wire, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold that in half and just make a crease, and then we're going to add a very thin bead of glue down the middle of that petal. And then all I do is I take my wire, make sure your wire is very straight. I add my petal, or I add my wire to the glue, and I just move it back and forth just to make sure it's in contact with all of the paper. I'm gonna gently fold it over, and I'm gonna squeeze and press towards that wire. And then I open it up and I just fold it over and kind of smooth it out, making sure you cannot see the wire. So you can see the front, and now you can see the back. So there's the back where I've pinched the wire between the paper, and there's the front where it's nice, flat, and glued. So I do that to all the crepe paper petals and let them dry, and then I paint them. But before I show you the crepe paper, let me just show you what I did with the coffee filters. Right? And when you're choosing your colors and you're painting, you're going to have to be working in pretty well full strength. So I took some blue, and this is just like regular food coloring. It's just these inexpensive food coloring. So I did about 4 drops of blue and 1 drop of red. I was trying to get a purple effect. And then I just took a nice thick brush, but you can use any kind of brush. You can see I've got all different ones. And what I did is I just went around the edge, and you can see that the water is already creating a bit of a ruffled effect around the petal, which is exactly what we want. So I took a little bit of water with my water brush, and then I just went in and just added a bead of full concentration food coloring. Once I got the color that I wanted. And you can see I just added a bead. And the more graduated that you want that, then just continually add a little bit more water. So what I did was, once I got my outer rim, I came in and just added some water on the inside. So I just added more water on the inside. And then from here, I just kept adding a bit more of the food coloring until I got the desired effect. So that looks good to me. And you just really have to run your paintbrush on the outside, and the water really does the rest. So I'm just adding more water to the inside and just letting that blue bleed through. So not every petal is going to be the same, but that's what's going to make it interesting. So now I've got my 3 big petals, and now I'm going to do the upper petals, and I really want these petals to be darker than the lower petals. So all I did, I'm going to change up the color a little bit. So I'm just going to add a little bit more red. It's actually a good idea to keep either scrap coffee filters on hand or a paper towel, and it gives you a good idea of the color. And this looks really, really deep, lightly. And these do dry maybe slightly lighter. So for the large petals, I just did a stripe down the center and a stripe around the sides. My color on the outside of the petals, just kind of tracing the outside. Now, if you're in a hurry, you could put them in the oven at about 225 degrees for about 5 minutes. So in terms of the petals for the basket coffee filters, I actually reused some of my coffee filters that I already had stained. So for this, I used acrylic paint, and I did the same thing. I added some water to the outside. And then started working my way in. And I'm taking my acrylic paint almost full on. Almost full strength. So I added the acrylic, and then I came back with more water and just smoothed out that edge. And with the acrylic paint, you need to do this on both sides. So I added it on one side, and then I added it on the other. And you will see that this will really give you a lot of control. And if I wanted to fill it in, all I did was I just kept coming back, and I'm just adding a bit of red. And while your paint is still wet, your acrylic paint, then you can really smooth out those edges. So there you go. And I could even add more red to the edge if I wanted to make even more of an impact. And then you're just going to let this to dry, but because this is acrylic paint, it will stick to the surface. So I have, if you are using acrylic paints, you may want to line your sheet with some saran wrap. That definitely makes it easier. But I'm just gonna let it dry for about 5 to 10 minutes, and then I'm gonna come and I'm gonna flip it over. And the same thing for the leaves. When you're painting with this straight color of the acrylic, you need to keep flipping it over and over to make sure that the acrylic paint doesn't stick to your surface, and then you rip your petals. So paint, flip it over, walk away for a few minutes, come back, flip it over, and then also you can check your color as it's drying to make sure it's enough. So now while those are drying, I'm going to show you how I colored my petals, my crepe paper. So for the crepe paper, and I pre-ruffled that, but for the crepe paper, you're going to want to use a cap full of alcohol, and you're going to want to have your oil pastels. So all I did was I took a fine brush and I just added enough alcohol to wet the edge. And because alcohol dries quickly, I only did a section at a time. Then I took my pastel and I ran it along the wet alcohol. And then with a bit more alcohol, I was able to come back and blend. You can see how the pastel blends. And it's going to be really bright when it dries. You want to use your pastel by going with the grain of the paper, because if you try doing it against the grain, then you're going to stretch your paper and you will distort the shape. You can see where it's wet and where it's drying. So it's a really, really cool effect. So I did that on the outside of the big petals, and then I just did another color because I used a darker crepe paper for the middle petals. And the alcohol dries so quickly, so it doesn't wet your paper and it doesn't distort the crepe paper before you're able to use it. So the only other thing that's left to do are the leaves. And again, the leaves I did full strength. I did a dark green in the center and I did a light green on the outside. I didn't do anything fancy. I just made sure that there was enough coats on the leaves so that they became fully opaque. And these are the coffee filters. You could use these coffee filters for leaves for your crepe paper. But if you didn't want to use that and you wanted to make crepe paper leaves, then you would use this. Again, you would fold over your crepe paper, you would apply your stencil to the fold, you'd cut out your leaf, but you would make sure that your leaf is going with the grain of the paper. And then when you open it up, you'd be able to really manipulate it and create some volume by stretching the paper. But basically, this is what I did for all of the leaves. Some are different, some are lighter, some are darker. I was really just trying to create a lighter edge on the outside, just to give it a little bit more realism, and that's it. In terms of the inside petal, I think you can see, maybe you can see the difference between the acrylic paint, which is very opaque, and the food coloring, which is very translucent. And you're just going to be cutting out these little guys, 3 of them for each flower, and that is going to be glued on like this. We're going to make some cuts so that when we bend our petal, it's going to be in relief, and it's going to add some texture. So now we're going to assemble our flowers. We've got 3 small petals, 3 large petals, 3 in between those little emerging petals. And then we've got, so the first thing we're gonna do, we'll just start with the large petals. And I've got these very thin wires. I'm just gonna cut them in half. They're about 9 inches in length. And I've got my tacky glue. Now, it'd be very difficult to use the glue gun because it just dries too quickly. And if you were to use the Elmer's glue, that takes a while to dry, and it really does make the paper wet. So if you can at all get this tacky glue, school glue, that would be great. So for all the petals, we're going to have to fold them in half and make a sharp crease. Now this is just for the coffee filters, because we've already, if you're using this is just for the coffee filters. If you're using the crepe paper, then you've already wired your petals. So everything is folded in half, like this. And then we're just going to cut. So you've cut a fringe like that. So when you open it up, it kind of looks like a feather. So now we're going to start with our largest petal, and we're just going to put a very thin line of glue from top to bottom along that crease that you've made. Like that. Take your wire, position it right in the center. And I just move it back and forth. I just move it back and forth, make sure there's contact with all the glue. And then you want to fold it over and push into that crease. Let it tack up. I think you can see the wire. It tacks up in about 30 seconds or so. And then you want to open it up, but creating that crease so you don't see the wire. And you're going to do that to all the large petals and the small petals. Now we've got all our petals, our coffee filter petals, on wire. So I'll just show you. So these are the small petals. This is the basket coffee filter. This is the cone coffee filter, and that's the crepe paper. So now the method is the same for all. So we're going to take our large petal, and we're going to take our folded, just like that. And we're going to place along the crease of the petal, like that, right in the center. Then I just take a chopstick and make sure that the yellow piece of paper has made contact with my petal, but I can still lift it. And we've made all those cuts. Once this dries, if we fold the yellow together, you can see how it will move with the flower. And then we can just raise these little bits and make them interesting. So now we've got all these done. So now we're gonna leave those off to the side to dry. And we're gonna start working with our main petals. Now I've got my glue gun ready to go. And we're going to take one of our stems, our 18 gauge wire. This one's already covered, but if you just have like a regular wire, then just use your tape to cover it. And then we're just gonna take a paper towel. I've got half a paper towel. And I just want maybe a third of a half. I just wanna roll it up to create a little bud like this. Now I'm gonna glue it so all these little bits of paper are flat. And you want to use paper towel because we're gonna paint this with either our watercolor, acrylic paint, or we're going to paint this with the food coloring after we've assembled it. So now we've got our bud, and I'm going to actually place my petals like this. My 3 center petals, I'm gonna place them around that bud, like that. Lay it like that. And then I'm just gonna wrap it around like that. And I'm going to lay the next one, and I'm gonna add the third one here. So by the way, I actually did this the wrong way. Because we're going to be looking at the outside of the petal, you want to have the smooth side on the outside of the petal, and you want the crease on the inside. But I did it in the opposite way. You can see the creases on the outside. It's not a big deal. It's not a big deal if you get it wrong. I did this one wrong. So now you just want to just bend all your petals to look like this. And now the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take these little emerging petals and I'm going to squish them at the collar and just pinch them so they look like this. And you can see when you pinch them, they kind of create a little cup because you folded it. And you can take a little pair of scissors and just give it a curl. Here's my piece. I turn it around and I'm going to position it right there to cover the gap. So all I do is, and we're just going to add enough glue to the tip, and then we're going to glue it right onto the stem like that. And you can see it's positioned between those 2 petals like that. And glue it in place. And as you glue it, you can see you curl it. So now you've got one at each opening from underneath. It looks like this. If you want to make these, I give it a little pinch on the fold, like that. And it helps them stand up like this. And now I'm going to take my large petal and I'm going to place it, I want to place it directly on top of my small petal. So I'm just going to line up the two and then I'm going to wire it in place. One, so that you can see how the large petal is lined up with the small petal, and these guys are in between. So I just take my large petal and I place it behind my small petal and then wire it. We're going to fold these down in place, but before we fold them down, we want to make sure you see how I've wired it. I'm just going to pull them all together and I'm going to make a little collar without squeezing it too much. I'm just going to take another small piece, another third of a half of a paper towel, and I'm just going to make a small collar. So I just do something like this, and then I can start wrapping it around just to make a collar like that. So now it's like that. Now I'm going to take a little piece of tape. I'm going to add some glue to the paper towel. And I'm going to start my tape at the collar, like so. And then I'm just going to do a really good job wrapping it around. And you want to stretch and wrap, stretch and wrap. So now you can see you've created that nice collar and you've covered up all that wire. Now is the fun part to start creating your flower, and you can do it however you want. So I like to just create a little teepee effect, and you can bend your petals however you like, but I like to make it a little teepee effect. And then I'm just going to take each petal and I'm just going to bend it down however it looks pleasing to the eye, like this. So I'm just raising some of these, and now I'm going to look at the flower, and then these guys you can just manipulate a little bit, and then I've created my center, and you can really work on these petals however you want them to look. And that's basically our iris. Oh, I almost forgot. We have to paint the inside. I almost forgot. We got to paint the inside. So I just basically take some, and this can be your watercolor or your acrylic paint. So I've just added some color, and then with a bit of water, and you just have to be careful not to saturate your paper towel too much. But if you wet that paper towel, then that color starts to spread. So you can see how it just peeks through that color. Petals more of a ruffled effect. Then you can just take a chopstick or a very thin bamboo stick, and you can just curl the sides. So you can see that just curling the sides gives it more definition. You can see how you can curl it, and it gives the petals a lot more interest and movement. And if your flower is looking slightly too far apart, you can always squeeze it from the bottom and just bring it together, and somehow it just makes the flower fit better. And to do the leaves, they're quite easy. Now you can just take, there's the large leaves, and again, you're just gonna fold it over like this. And there's the small leaves. Fold it and create that crease. And what I did for the bud is I just took a piece of paper towel and I rolled it into a little bud like this. This is about 1.5 inches long. And then I took one of the small leaves and I placed the bud in the leaves close to the top, so it's peeking out. And I'm going to be able to glue it here, and then I'm going to be able to glue this to the stem. So for demonstration purposes, it's going to look something like this when it's, so I've got it in the top part. You can see if I open it, and now I'm just going to glue this in position. And I'm just going to glue in the bottom part. And I just want to glue the paper towel in place, really. I've still got an opening. And now I'm going to position it on my flower, and I want it to be close to the top. And I want to make sure that I've got my flower wrapped in. I'm going to add a little bit more of the floral tape. And I've still got the opening. And then I'm just going to slide my stem into that leaf. You can see how it just holds it like that. And I'm going to just glue this in place. Fold that out a little bit so I can see the bud. And now I'm going to paint the bud. So now that I've got my bud up close to the top, and you can position it wherever you want, then I'm going to take my big leaf and I'm just going to overlap the last leaf, and I'm just going to glue it in place like this so that I've got a secondary leaf. And the other thing that I did is once I had, and you can keep going adding leaves all the way down, but I'm just going to add 2. And what I did do was, because I was trying to make the edges of the leaf a little bit lighter, then I just bend the leaf backwards, just make some of those folds, and just fold the leaf backwards, just revealing a little bit of that extra color. Looks a little bit more realistic. With the center is I'm just going to add, I just add a bit of water with some dye on it. And there you go, you've just got a little bud that's emerging from the flower and a leaf. Now you're going to do the exact same thing using the crepe paper, but with the crepe paper, you will be able to furl the edges just by stretching them. And you can see that by stretching the edges, you can really create a ruffle. Paper for these little petals, I created a little cup just by stretching those, and you can see how it creates a little cupped effect, but there's still, we've still pressed them in the center. And with the crepe paper, we've bent our petals to create this effect, but we can also create a ruffled effect just by spreading that petal apart. And you can see that by stretching it, you create all this additional ruffle, which adds to its interest. So let me show you on. So this is the small petal. So because we've cut all the way down here, you can actually stretch the paper to create a ruffled effect. I think you can see. And you can alternate, do one out, do one in, and you can see how it ruffles. Also, the other thing you can do is when you bend and cup the flower like this in the center, you can also take the center and stretch it on both sides, and that creates a really nice cupped effect. For the large leaf, and the paper is on a V like this, you can see it. It goes on a V into itself. We've got all this area that we can ruffle. So it's really just a matter of playing around, and you can stretch that, and look how you create a ruffle. So I'm just skipping and just ruffling, and you can see once you bend it, you can create a ruffle like this. You have to look and see where the lines go and where you'd like to stretch. So for instance, I could stretch it here, and I think it makes a big difference. So we've got our basket coffee filter, we've got our cone coffee filter, and we've got our crepe paper. And I think that regardless of which paper you use, this is a really fun craft, and I think the flowers turn out really pretty. So if you enjoyed this tutorial, I hope you try this. And if you try this and you like it, I hope you share it. And if you'd like to see more content, I hope you subscribe. Until next time, happy flower making.